Hello, and thank you for all of you for joining me this evening. I wanted to discuss something that's obviously of importance to anyone who claims to be a Christian, and that comes up from time to time on this channel, whether it's a day text video as we work our way through the biblical books and histories, or at times when I do a CWJah talk or open session, because we get different listeners. Mostly people with a Christian background or who have Christian beliefs. So the question becomes, well, how close are we in spite of our beliefs? And it's not a question that most of us are unfamiliar with because we recognize in the world, and I mean by the world in this sense, the whole earth of people, that there are different Christian groups that we encounter. There, you might meet a Mormon, you might meet a Jehovah's Witness, and you might meet some other Christian group or missionary, depending on which country we're discussing. Excuse me. And they may present to you things from the biblical texts, and for the most part, it will be similar to what other people are hearing, regardless of which one of those groups I mentioned. Unless, of course, with respect to Mormons, for example, they highlight over the Bible something like the Book of Mormon, which is a part of their collection of Scripture. So, in other words, what I'm saying is, if we're all using the biblical text as part of our ministry, which Mormons often do, then the portion of the Bible that we're using in our ministry, more often than not, is going to be the same Christian message, at least when it comes to texts that aren't often considered controversial. And those are not many, again, by comparison to the text that we have agreement with. So, for example, you could go to a text in the letter of 1 John, which I'm going to read for you briefly. This is what we're going through in our day text shows, which are during the week, Monday through Friday usually, and Saturday, unless otherwise scheduled. And then we just work our way through the texts of the Bible, read them, look at them in their historical context, and then we try to apply them, obviously, today, and benefit in the same way, and hopefully display the same Christian fruitage. And by fruitage, in the Christian sense, it's a term that the New Testament uses in several texts. It's really the things that we produce. So like a tree, it can produce fruit. And a little bit later in the discussion, I'm going to read for you a section from the historical narrative of John, Jesus' beloved disciple, where he talks about Christians as parts of a tree, branches, if you will. And so, but in 1 John, his letter, one of his three letters, at least in the New Testament, he writes things, for example, about the Antichrist. The Antichrist being one who opposes Christ. Or in the case of John, in what he writes in 1 John, his first letter, his largest or longest letter that we have, he talks about how it would be, the Antichrist would oppose those who believe Jesus came as the Christ in the flesh, as the Son of God. In fact, I'm going to read for you just a couple of texts, and then we're going to read a couple together. But a couple are brief enough to where I'm just going to read them, and then we'll continue our discussion. You're free to post in the chat. This is really a discussion that talks about the different Christian groups, and I'm just laying a foundation here real briefly, because I'm going to propose something new. I guess you could say it's new in the sense that it's not something you often hear, but I think it actually is right here in these texts. For example, in 1 John, the first letter of John in the New Testament, which pretty much everyone that I listed in the subject description for this live stream would accept as representative of actual Christian teaching. So 1 John 4, chapter 4, verses 14 and 15. Two really brief texts. No one really disputes them in terms of translation. They're in every biblical text. pretty much. There's no real significant difference that I'm aware of. And it says, in addition, this is John writing, Jesus' closest disciple, student, friend. We ourselves have beheld and are bearing witness that the Father has sent forth the Son as Savior of the world. And that sounds a little bit like a text you're probably all familiar with, regardless of whether you're a Christian or not, and that is John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever should believe in him will have everlasting life. And then it says so similarly in 1 John, the next verse, verse 15. I read verse 14. Now, I'm just laying a brief foundation here because I think if we just consider a couple of texts and then think about our differences for a moment, we often focus on our differences and not enough about the text when we're together. And that's why I wanted to group it this way, so that we could have people from different faiths, whoever wanted to join us, or whoever watches the video can at least see that what we're discussing is the heart of Christianity. And by the heart, I'm talking about what is clearly expressed to us as the things that Christians would confess. And in this context, specifically, John, I got a little hair right here. I can see it a little. I don't know if you can. There we go. John is dealing with the Antichrist. So he's talking about Christians who do this versus the Antichrist who does that, who opposes the Christ, that is Jesus as having come in the flesh as the Son of God. And that's what he says here in verse 15. Whoever makes the confession, 1 John 4:15. It should be in anyone's Bible who's watching. Whoever makes the confession, whoever makes the confession that Jesus is the Son of God, God remains in that one, and he remains in or with God. So that statement right there makes things pretty clear and simple, right? And so the question is, who would make that confession? All right, so Trinitarians would say Jesus is the Son of God. I understand, and we'll talk about in a moment, some of the other things that might come with that. But let's just ask ourselves this question. The different groups I listed in the header, or whomever you can think of and you want to post in the chat, if there's a Christian group, and you can think of them and they don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, 1 John 4:15, put it down. But Trinitarians believe that. Let me try to get the mic right here just to make sure the volume is good. Unitarians believe that. Again, I understand there are differences. And by Unitarians in this sense, I'm just going to use it as a reference to those who are non-Trinitarian and who do not believe Jesus pre-existed his human birth or conception in Mary. I'm not going to get into it more or beyond that in this discussion because I'm actually going to try to peel away those layers. But for now, let's just ask the question. So I'm describing each group a little bit just so we kind of are aware. We're not ignorant of the differences. Okay, Trinitarians nonetheless believe Jesus is the Son of God. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Unitarians believe that. Christian Witnesses of Jah believe that. Jehovah's Witnesses believe that. Mormons believe that. So if there's another Christian group you think is out there that's proclaiming Jesus as the Christ but not the Son of God, or vice versa, or any part of that, Jesus Christ is the Son of God, it says right there, whoever makes the confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, God remains in that one, and he with or in God. Now, let me just say this. With that in mind, I want to point something out to you. To all of you Christians who are joining me. I don't care which group you belong to necessarily, although it might make a difference. But I'm really speaking even beyond the group, the people in the group. So I'm speaking to you personally, really, right now. As individuals, regardless of the group to which you belong. It could be Mormons, it could be Jehovah's Witnesses, it could be any Trinitarian or evangelical or Catholic, any Christian group right now to which you belong. I can't think of one that wouldn't accept that confession. Okay, now obviously Islam, Muslims, they don't claim to be a Christian religion, although they do accept Jesus in a sense beyond, of course, what Jews would accept Jesus as, who don't accept him as the Messiah. So we get into this kind of gradation of belief or acceptance or non-acceptance of Jesus. But nonetheless, Muslims and those who follow Islam don't promote themselves necessarily as a Christian group. I think they probably would. Maybe they would say they're Christian in the real sense. So I'm not going to take that away from them. I'm just pointing out that in the sense in which I'm referencing these different groups, I'm talking about those who are openly accepted and proclaim themselves as Christian. I think almost every one of them would say, the individuals, at least who are watching, and most who are a part of these groups, unless they're just pretending, right? We all have that, or people who want to be a part of something but they're really not. So I'm not really getting into that. I'm talking about whether or not we are allowing ourselves to be vulnerable when we shouldn't be. Because the non-Christian groups, they're not playing by the same rules. They're working together and setting aside their differences in order to make life more difficult for us. At least that's what I see. Or it's happening too often and to too many people. And I know as a Christian, I don't do that to them. And so I notice it when they do it to me, and I'm like, okay, these people they're playing by different rules. And this sort of ties in with, if you've been watching my insurance fraud videos, and some of that is a little bit unrelated to the purpose of this channel, but it somewhat ties in at times. And I'm trying not to let this channel become dominant with that discussion. I have another channel for that. But it's a good example at times, because those people often who are involved in more criminal activity, whether it's insurance fraud or any other kind of crime, they're not usually friendly towards Christians or Christianity, because we don't promote crime, or we shouldn't be, unless we're just false Christians, right? Unless we're using our Christianity to mislead people or false lights. So I'm not going to get into that and start talking about the different potential people or groups. That's not the purpose. I want us to actually look more at what we have in common in a positive way. Because if we don't, here's what's going to happen. And you tell me what you think. And we'll talk about, the extent of belief in the New Testament, things like that. But for now, just keep in mind what I read from 1 John. We're going to read a couple other texts. But let me just tell you, in this sense, what I'm talking about. And that is, they're not playing by the same rules. See, as a Christian, whether you're Trinitarian, Unitarian, Christian Witness of Jah, Jehovah's Witness, Mormon, if you're really trying to follow the New Testament, the teachings about Jesus and what he did and taught, then you're not likely going to be promoting what is against your brother. Because in 1 John, that's what he talks about, right? He says, we know that the Antichrist is the one who hates his brother. And the one who is from God loves his brother. And who is our brother and sister if it's not the one that John says confesses Jesus Christ as the Son of God? So, now here's where we become vulnerable. Because if there are false Christians or people who don't fully accept that connection I just made, and they're willing to damage you for their own sakes or the sake of their group, which they believe is more Christian than you, then we're going to end up destroying each other. And unless we're really not our Christian brother, why are we destroying each other? Why are we looking at our differences to the extent that we compromise potentially our faith and our relationships when we could be uniting over some of these more simple statements of faith, like 1 John 4:15? It allows for every single group to believe. And I'm going to explain in a minute, maintain our own differences. I said earlier, I know about our differences. Okay, so what about this and that? For now, just hold with me on this vision, because this is what I'm talking about. This is why I'm doing this live stream and video in the first place. It's why I have this channel. It's why I'm the target at times of some of these other non-Christian criminals, and for other reasons as well, as I talk about. But there's also this Christian element that they don't like. They know if they can take that from me or from you, well, what do you think we'll be like? We're probably more like them. But we believe, so it's not so easy. That'd be true for anything, right? If they stop believing in criminal behavior and lawlessness and actually look to the future beyond their death and their life now in a more positive, wholesome, socially uplifting way, then they could also change. So that, it can go either way if an individual decides that what they believe and how they live is no longer the way. So the way that we believe is, of course, Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God. This is John, and I'm repeating what he's talking about. So now they're not playing by the same rules, and we're not really playing by our own rules, right? So they're willing to come together. By they, I mean non-Christians, anti-Christians, really. The people John's talking about. They don't believe Jesus is the Christ. They may be nice, and I can get along with anyone. I've said it before. I'm happy to coexist with anyone as long as they're not going to damage me, right? Destroy me, take my stuff. So you have to watch people. You don't just become ignorant because you're coexisting socially with people. Watch your back. And they watch theirs, and we get along, hopefully. But when it comes to your religion and the things you believe and teach and see in life and hope other people see, the question is, to what extent will you treat them different if they don't see what you see? And for me, I don't treat anyone different socially when it comes to seeing what I see or not. I just either work closely with them in the things that I see or I don't. But I'm more than capable of working or doing other stuff, going to the gym, the market, whatever. Now, okay, so if I'm willing to do that with people who may not believe anything I believe, what about the people who do believe some of the things I believe? And in fact, the things that I'm told whoever confess, God remains in union with. 1 John 4:15. Now, let me share with you something else that Jesus said in response to John, the one we just read, who wrote that letter. Now, this is Luke, someone who chronicled all of the events during the first century that happened with respect to Jesus and people like John. And so in Luke 9:49 and 50, just two verses, here's what they say. It says, so there was some context before, and John says, instructor or teacher, he's talking to Jesus. He says, we saw a man throwing out demons using your name, and we tried to stop him because he's not following with us. This is John talking. And then in verse 50, Jesus says to John, the one we wrote, who said, whoever makes the confession Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, God remains in union with. Jesus says to him, Luke 9:50, do not you men try to prevent him. This is the key part. For he that is not against you is for you. And that is what I want to focus on in connection with what we read in 1 John. He that is not against you is for you. Now they're working together. By there, I mean non-Christians, anti-Christians, those who do not accept Jesus as having come in the flesh, doesn't matter how socially acceptable they are, we'll work with them and all, great. Right now I'm talking about faith. Okay, who's going to cultivate that with you? Who can you trust in the sense of your spiritual growth and things outside of just social norms, right? We don't discriminate against anybody when it comes to work or outside things, but when it comes to our faith and our home and the people we build spiritual bonds with, or whom we want to call Christian, he that is not against you is for you. Now, when we fight, that sounds so odd. In light of what I was just reading, it just sounded a little odd for me to say that. But that's probably a good thing. So, when we fight, when Trinitarians and Unitarians fight, you're against each other. But if you were to unite, how can you do that? How could Unitarians and Trinitarians unite when one group believes Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, co-equal with the Father, and you know, if you're all familiar with the Trinity, you know the rest. Essentially God, eternal, but as the Son. I'm not going to get into it in a deep, super metaphysical way or beyond that. Only to the extent that I think I need to in order to make my point here. This is about really getting along. But we need to understand the differences if we're going to bridge the gap. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He that is not against you is for you. Okay, right there is the gap. I want you to help me bridge that gap. We can do it. And I have some other texts, but let me finish what I was just saying, because I think we can do this several ways. Now, when Trinitarians and Unitarians fight, one believes the Trinitarians, Jesus is second person of the Trinity, God eternal, obviously pre-existent, as a person. And yes, I understand. Equal in substance, different in person, all the stuff that an accepted Orthodox Trinitarian would say is a must. And then Unitarians who would deny that, Unitarian again in the sense of the Unitarians who believe Jesus is the Christ, just not God, but more just a man and God's plan, pre-existent only in the mind of God, but not as a person. Regardless of how he would pre-exist, it's not as a person in the sense that the Trinitarians believe Jesus pre-existed. Nor as, in the same sense, I should say, as the type of person a Christian witness of Jehovah or Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon would say pre-existed, I believe. So they would all believe those were actual people that existed before they came to earth. So, and I understand there are differences. But my point is, we're talking about Unitarians and Trinitarians, right? Let's not throw everyone in the ring together and do like a spiritual, what do they call those WWE? Royal Rumble. That's not going to work. That's not what I'm aiming for. I want us to all try to bridge the gap. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He that is not against you is for you. There's our gap. Trinitarians believe Jesus is the pre-existent eternal Son of God, equal in substance, different in person from the Father and Holy Spirit. Unitarians who believe Jesus is not a pre-existent person, believe he existed from the time of conception in the womb or when he was born, either one. How do we bridge that gap? Well, let me try again. John says, whoever makes the confession that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, God remains in union with him and he in union with God. Okay, so both Unitarians and Trinitarians believe that. Just that statement. All right, I know we just described the basic, big difference, the gap. Right? Well, we know where the gap is, but it was a big gap in terms of the pre-existence and the ontology, the nature of the person of Jesus. But this text says, whoever confesses Jesus Christ is the Son of God. both Trinitarians and Unitarians would say yes to that. Now we say, okay, yeah, but they mean different things, Greg. And yes, I know that. But John doesn't get into that here. And so what I'm trying to get us to get into is this right here. Because they're not playing by the same rules. They're working together to oppose Christianity and isolating us from one another as much as they can, and getting us to fight and defeat ourselves, or at least weaken ourselves, because we're spending more time and energy and faith trying to convince others who believe these things that I'm referencing and reading for you, and you can read yourself too. So I guess what I'm getting at is, how much more do we want to allow these anti-Christians, whom John is elsewhere talking about in this letter? How much more do we want to let anti-Christians break us down? We're standing, we're not dying, we're Christians, right? We don't give in. We'll keep going until we reach wherever Jesus says we're going, because we believe and we have good reasons for that. But my point is, how hard do we want to make it on ourselves when we could be working together, lessening our casualties, growing in our strength? To what extent do we want to keep dividing or maintain divisions over what John is talking about? John doesn't really say, now everyone knows I'm CWJ. John doesn't really say Jesus is the Son of God, the pre-existent second person of the Trinity. Nor does John say Jesus Christ is the Son of God from the time he was conceived in Mary. Nor does he say, as CWJ, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, one of the pre-existent sons of God, who, like the other sons of God, it is a plural, but sons of God, are gods in the sense that they either represent Jah or their own interests and become their own God. But so okay, it doesn't say any of those things. We say those things. We say all those other things, and we say those other things are more important than those things that John actually wrote and that I read and that you can read yourself. So we're giving more weight. We're giving more emphasis and power. And we're losing things by preferring the things John doesn't say over the things that he does. So what I'm trying to do is to get us to switch that around. Not change your view. Not make a Trinitarian believe, unless they need more help with their faith. My goal is not to get a Trinitarian to believe necessarily that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, one of the pre-existent sons of God who are like God, a God to the extent they represent the Father. You know how I view it. And the text for why. Just like Trinitarians have their reasons why. So if I can set aside that for the sake of this text and just get someone to believe Jesus is the Christ based on the evidence, and I presented part of it in my series, CWJah Talk series, Jesus is the Christ, based on pre-Christian evidence that we can show was written and that foretold things that were uniquely fulfilled in him. If I can get someone to believe that, and that he's the Son of God because, as he says, if others who are called sons of God can be called gods, then because he does the things that the Father does, that's why he's the Son of God. Or whatever other text. That's my text, right? That's the one I use often to just show the connection between being a son of God and being sons of God and also being a God without compromising God's monotheism. But I'm not going to get into that, right? That's part of that's what I attach to this based on either other texts or my belief about these words in the text that makes me CWJ. A Trinitarian also believes, as some are right in the text, and I've seen, and I understand, and they have their texts, and they have their reasons, that Jesus is the pre-existent Son of God from eternity as God the Son, part of the Trinity. And Unitarians believe that this text means something different, that Jesus is the Son of God, the Christ, from the time he was conceived in Mary, or as pre-existent in the sense of in the mind of God, something like that. Either way, none of those are in this text, and they're what divide us. They're not playing by the same rules. You know, as a Christian man, I could sit here and keep fighting, and I will. Fighting in the sense of, this isn't really our world. It's not always or ever really going to be in our favor to the extent that as a Christian we would like. Not even under Constantine, right? I mean, I don't look at Constantine as like a great Christian man. I mean, whether he was used by Christ or God or not, that's beyond for me to understand. Just like it would be for any kind of other ruler or person who was involved in some kind of change in national power or geography, whether Christian, Muslim, or other. God can use whomever, just like he did in the Bible. My point is that Constantine wasn't just like some great man, but how many of us are really that great? So we know we can find flaws with every man. We know we can find flaws with every woman. We all die. The question I'm asking is, to the extent that we're alive, how hard are we going to make it on ourselves as Christian? I know there are going to be other people who still care enough about their differences, like whether they're Trinitarian or Unitarian, and they just see that as it's too important, right? Whether Jesus Christ had a pre-existent life, that's like a big deal. It is. It's in the sense that it's a significant teaching. It's not what John says here. Now, we know Jesus says things in John 8 and elsewhere that at least for Trinitarians and CWJs and JWs, maybe Mormons too, would indicate pre-existence in a personal sense. But my point is, this is a little bit different text. 1 John 4:15 says, whoever makes the confession, Jesus Christ is the Son of God, God remains with that person and he with God. Now, we know that's it's not always so easy. People can say things and mislead us. Even Jesus says there would be people who called out and said, Lord, Lord, did powerful works. And so we can be deceived and people can deceive us. But in connection with this confession, you usually have what I said we produce at the beginning, and that is fruitage. Fruitage is what we produce, at least in a metaphorical sense, in terms of what we do. So that's why faith is often, and usually always in some sense, involved with works, because we have to demonstrate our beliefs, at least to some extent, so that people would even know in the first place whether someone is for you or against you. Remember, we're trying to bridge that gap. You may be a Trinitarian. Jesus is pre-existent, eternal. I need you to believe that or you can't be a Christian. Why? Well, Jesus says so. John 8:24, unless you believe I am. Whatever the text, how they would see it. And I believe that's different, of course, in the sense of Jesus as the Christ. But my point is they'd see it that way. And another might say, as a Unitarian, no, I don't believe Jesus pre-existed. I can't accept that. How are we going to bridge that gap? You believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. One saying you need to believe he's eternal, pre-existent Son of God. The other says, no, not an eternal, pre-existent Son of God. Messiah, Son of God from the time of birth. Yet another group comes in and says, well, he's pre-existent as a person, the Son of God, but he's not a part of a Trinity. He's just God in the sense that he does everything God does, different from Satan. And so he's God in the sense that he only acts and does what God tells him to do. And he's a spirit like God. So he, actually looks like God. In the sense that all the sons of God and spirits look like God, being spirits. But we don't know beyond that in the sense that the Bible tells us, at least, all of the actual differences. We get some descriptions, right? I mean, God is described in Revelation metaphorically. I mean, we don't know to what extent to take these things literally or in what sense representative of actuality, spirituality, metaphysicality. So we can't get too caught up in that. But we do. We get caught up in that because we try to say that Jesus and the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit have this sharing of this nature that we really have never been, in the sense that we could say what's actually taking place. We only have these texts. So Trinitarians they have the text that would call Jesus the biblical terms for God, and or apply texts from the Old Testament that they would say equate him with Jehovah, or the God of the Hebrew Scriptures. But in spite of that, okay, I'm not asking you to change that. I'm asking how we bridge that gap. I'm not asking Trinitarians to change how they view God's nature in the sense that they do. I'm not asking Unitarians to stop believing Jesus as the Messiah just from the time that he was born or conceived. And I'm certainly not asking CWJs or Jehovah's Witnesses to stop believing Jesus as God's Son in the sense that I believe, according to the texts. I'm asking how we bridge that gap. Mormons too, right? You say you believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. We know you have other texts. That often is an issue and a reason why we don't know if you're for us or against us. Right? What does it say in Luke 9:50? He that is not against you is for you. We need to know that. We need to know that. Right? How can I, let's say now me, or anybody, let's say someone like me, and maybe someone who's a Trinitarian or a Unitarian, and they don't really believe the same way in terms of Jesus' nature as me, but they believe this text, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, whether it's a man or a woman. I say woman only because, in some sense, a man desires a woman a man. And so we view ourselves as more effective together in the sense that we can, if we can. And if not, then we can work together as brothers too, and we often do. So the same would be true as far as, what would I do if I had a Unitarian or a Trinitarian? And I've talked about this on my channel to some of the comments in my videos, right? I mean, I've had questions like, well, we wouldn't shun you. On my one video where I said the Watchtower and Trinitarians have this one thing in common. They'll shun you, basically. I didn't, and I started out the video. I was pretty clear, I thought, but I understand people have different views. And I was talking about Christian ministry. What I'm talking about right now, I was talking about whether or not I would be able to work with a Trinitarian and do ministry and present something from the text in a way we could both believe and share with someone else without getting into our differences. I've been with some Trinitarians who've taken me to a church, especially when I was really low several years ago. And they helped me in a sense to at least show me some compassion in that way, even though they knew I was very different. And it was just a few things, but it was because of work and other things. And I did go to one church meeting with Trinitarians, and it was fine. And they read things that I could accept and things that I knew they viewed different. And I just didn't say anything. It wasn't my place. That's not my time. I went there to just benefit in the sense that I felt hopefully I could. And I did. And so that's what I'm really looking for us to do. See, I bridged that gap just those few times. Whether I was at the church or when I was with the person or his wife and we talked. It was a good time. But it didn't really happen in the sense that it should happen and could happen. And if it did happen, a lot of other things would happen. We would be able to make so much happen. It would open up so many opportunities for us to be more involved, right? Defend things like the truth about God's existence from evolutionists and others who are either misled or misleading our children and others, lying about our God, or teaming up together so we're not all victims of insurance fraud and all these people, man. And, I'm not here to police everyone or I'm dealing with specific people, of course, as I've talked about before in the insurance sense. People who've actually interfered with my life and damaged my family and who still are. So we all have to go through those experiences and times, but I would be much more effective. And I think for others, I could help them be more effective if we could bridge that gap. If we could set aside our differences, not ignore them. Right? That's too tall of an order. That's too tall of an order. I don't think I don't think short of Jesus returning, we're going to be able to go and solve all of our differences and come together. We're going to have to accept some measure of difference. Even Paul did. He says in the texts that differences must exist in order for things to be manifest. And we are also members of a body. The question is, are we members of the same body? That's what it really comes down to. And that's where I think we get exclusive of each other in ways that I'm hoping to not eliminate, but make easier for us to work together. We're too much against each other when we have too much to work on together. And the anti-Christians are using that to their advantage. They're not using it to our advantage. They're going to keep us separate. They're going to try to make us weak. And if we have to be weak, if we have to be separate, then we know as Christians, when we're weak, what? We're strong. So it doesn't matter if we're one or we're many, we go on. My point is we could do a lot more together. We could do a lot more together if we worked on these texts. And so I'm going to just read a couple more with you. Excuse me, you know how it is when you talk for a while. So let's take a look just at a couple more texts. And then I'll look at some questions or we'll wrap it up. But I just want to have a few minutes with you guys and talk about these things because I know, whether you're new to my channel or if you've been here before or you've seen me on different videos, I've talked about different things in ways that, if you're a Trinitarian, it may not always sound that great. For example, I did a video on Caldwell. Obviously, Caldwell lived 50 or so plus years ago when he wrote many of the things that he did or that are controversial in terms of Caldwell's rule. And I took issue with it because it wasn't just that Caldwell made a mistake. We all do that. And we all sometimes can make big mistakes. And I'm not talking about whether Caldwell's a Christian because of some rule he makes. I don't view that as the reason. I still may criticize him or anybody or be criticized for a mistake. It's just that in Caldwell's case, I chose to make that separate video from another show because as a Jehovah's Witness and as a CWJ, but mostly as a Jehovah's Witness with the Watchtower, that came up a lot. And Caldwell's rule was used by Caldwell and others like Metzger, who also, I'm not saying he's not a Christian. I'm just saying that he and Caldwell and others used information that was not helpful. It wasn't accurate. And regardless of what you think about it overall, it didn't help us come together. I know that because I had to deal with it all the time. And others had to deal with it. Bowman and others had to write about it. Now, they may have, I'm not talking about whether you're pro or against Caldwell. My point is, it didn't bring us together. Not in the way that if we focused on these other things, we could have done more and maybe kept people from being exposed to so much rising anti-Christianity. Maybe we could have more relationships. Maybe it wouldn't be so hard for brothers to work together, whether you're Trinitarian or Unitarian or CWJ. I realize some groups have their own way, right? So maybe a Watchtower person or Mormon, they're structurally more limited than CWJ or certain Trinitarian groups or Unitarian groups. We're a little more free in our structural ability to say, okay, I'll work with you. I don't believe exactly like you do, but you do believe these things. Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Let's focus on that. So let's try to help these people here come to know Jesus as the Christ or Jesus as the Son of God in terms of him being sent by the Father. So my point is, let's say, for example, we're talking to Jews. There's a Trinitarian, a Unitarian, and me. What are we going to do? Are we going to let the Jewish person who believes in, we'll say, Rabbinic Judaism, but nonetheless would be open to discussion of the Scriptures, are we just going to not say anything if we have the opportunity and he or she wants to talk? And we're just going to not try to talk about Jesus as the Christ according to the law and the Psalms and the prophets because we don't agree? And see, that would be to me the worst loss for Christianity. That example I just gave you, we need to solve. And I believe if we bridge that gap, we can solve it. Keep that in mind. That if we have a Jewish person who's open to discussion. And many are. But we don't have to force on people. I'm talking about people who want to talk. They want to talk. They don't think we're right, or they just want to see what we think. And we're there, Trinitarian, Unitarian, me. Are we going to do that effectively? Can we bridge this gap, set aside our differences, and talk to this person about Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God according to the Bible? Maybe a text like in Proverbs 21, where Jesus calls the Son. But even outside of that, just as the Christ, texts like Micah 5, Isaiah 53, Zechariah 12, Deuteronomy 18. Or are we going to allow our divisions about what's beyond the text I read, 1 John 4:15? Because we either do or do not believe Jesus is the pre-existent Son of God in the personal sense. Are we going to let this Jewish person miss the opportunity of getting our combined belief and ability to speak about reasons why they should accept Jesus as the Christ? I say we come up with a way to do that very thing, to not allow our differences beyond Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God, to keep us from reaching that person if that's what they want, and that's what the Father calls us and them to do. So we have to come up with a way, I believe, to stop arguing with each other. And if we're not against each other, we're for each other. So what are we for? Well, really, we should be for the praise of Jah. And that's what it says in Philippians 1:9 through 11. I'll just read it real briefly. It says, he's writing, he says that our love may abound more and more. And then in verse 10 he says, make sure of the more important things, that you may be flawless, not stumbling others up to the day of Christ. And then Philippians 1:11 he says, and may be filled with righteous fruit. Remember what we produce? Which is through Jesus Christ, to God's glory and praise. Very similar to what he says in Philippians 2:11, one full chapter over how we reckon it. And so notice though what he says. He says may be filled with righteous fruit, which is what? Jesus Christ, to God's glory and praise. So if you want a reason why a Trinitarian, a Unitarian, and someone like me, or a Watchtower person, or anybody, should set aside our differences beyond Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God. That's why. That's why. To God's glory and praise. We're not doing that when we divide ourselves and we hate or we disagree in ways among each other where we can't show people the reason why we believe, because we're fighting with each other about the extent to which we believe beyond what we can show in these texts, and that is Jesus as the Christ. So, in closing, I want to share with you, we'll read together John chapter 15, and I'll pull it up here from the New World Translation, just because, again, as I've explained before, I haven't translated every text, and I'm familiar with the New World Translation, so if you see a problem or an issue, just let me know. I use it for convenience, and I think in large part it is accurate in terms of presenting the text. So let's take a look at it. We're going to read John chapter 15, and we're going to read 1 through 13, and then we're going to finish. So this is it. Take a look. Verse 1, John chapter 15, and we can read together here. We're going to go down to 13, so it shows, I'll pull this up just so we're not distracted. Well, that'll change it. We're going to go down to 13. Okay, right here, we'll start. John 15:1. This is Jesus talking. I am the true vine, and my Father is the cultivator. Verse 2, every branch in me not bearing fruit. Remember, fruit, Philippians 1:11, is Jesus Christ to praise God. Every branch in me not bearing fruit, he takes away. He's talking about the Father. And every one bearing fruit, he cleans, that it may bear more fruit. Verse 3, you are already clean because of the word that I spoke to you. Verse 4, remain in union with me, or in me, and I in you, just as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it remains in the vine. In the same way, neither can you unless you remain in union with me. Verse 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. He that remains in union with me and I in union with him, this one bears much fruit. What is the fruit? Philippians 1:11, Jesus Christ, to God's glory and praise. Because, verse 5, after this we're going to wrap it up. Because apart from me you can do nothing at all. Verse 6, if anyone does not remain in me, he is cast out as a branch and dried up. And men gather those branches up and pitch them into the fire and they're burned. He's talking metaphorically, but he describes what happens when people reject him or don't remain in him. We're not going to get off into a separate subject about salvation, although, Jack, I have a very important text and section to read. But again, I'm trying to bring us together, so this isn't about getting into our theological differences. Verse 7, if you remain in me and my sayings remain in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will take place for you. Verse 8, he's talking to his followers. My Father is glorified in this, that you keep bearing much fruit and prove yourselves my disciples. What is fruit? Philippians 1:11, Jesus Christ, to God's glory and praise. Verse 9, we're just going to verse 13. Just as the Father has loved me and I have loved you, remain in my love. Verse 10, if you observe my commandments, you will remain in my love, just as I have observed the commandments of the Father and remain in his love. Verse 11, these things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and your joy may be made full. Verse 12, this is my commandment, that you love one another, just as I have loved you. How do we do that? Verse 13, no one has love greater than this, that someone should surrender his soul in behalf of his friends. That's the love that Jesus had. Yet he, as master and teacher, told us, even though he is those things, that he washes his own disciples' feet. And they even tried to prevent him. And what did he say? You'll have no sharing with me unless I wash your feet. Let me just close in this by asking, how many of us wash each other's feet? I'm not really asking for an answer, and I know a lot of us do, literally or in other ways that are similar to what they did. And they didn't wear the kind of shoes we wear. Even though we walk a lot and our feet get tired, they wore different types of shoes or sandals in ways that made it more necessary at times or appropriate to ease each other and to make each other's feet feel better. But this is what Jesus did to them. I'm asking us, what are you willing to do? I know what I'm willing to do, as hard as it might be for me to not express my belief. And you all know what I believe. You all know why I believe, and to the extent I promote it as my belief. You know I love my belief. And I know you do too. So the question is, will you, like me, do what Jesus says is necessary to show that we have the love that marks his followers? Well, if that's the case, and if we can focus on Jesus as the Christ, to God's glory and praise, Philippians 1:11, then we'll know who are the Christians.